I think in terms of teamwork, in terms of leadership, I think we have a representative from this government which has shown exemplary teamwork. We see it every day. The gentleman that is honored with us, with our presence, has multiple experiences, worked in Middle East, has worked in the US, has straddled the private sector and the public sector. He was the regional director of Middle East for Charles River Associates and has taken senior positions within public and private sector consulting within Middle East and in the US. He's a PhD doctor, PhD and MS in healthcare administration. He's going to talk about leadership in the age of disruption. And I think there's no better person to talk about it, given I feel that these days he might, every day when he wakes up, he might feel that there has some disruption that has gone on the television screens. So I think someone to talk about really how to navigate these disruptive times, we have Mr. Musadik Malik, who's the Minister of State and Spokesman for the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My job is very easy. So you want to know about leadership in disruption? I present to you Mr. Shaukat Tareen and Mr. Zubair. And that's it. Thank you very much. That's really the leadership, all I have to say. Be like Tareen and become like Zubair. Mr. Tareen is one of the most confident, secure, and disruptive innovators that I've ever met. And when he said there are very few people in the political arena, a lot of politicians would say this, but very few people actually have the security of giving the credit to their team. And this man has the greatest knack for doing that, and I thank him very much because I've had the personal privilege of working with him. Mr. Zubair, you can put him in a can of worms, and very soon the worms would be shaking hands. He has such a calming impact. And he has an amazing capability of bringing factions who are at daggers drawn together and bring them to a collective vision, a shared vision of what the future may look like. So we are very privileged to have both of them here because both of them give you an insight into the leadership in disruptive times, a shared vision, a disruption that comes from innovation, and how to bring it together through various teams, big teams. So big hand for both of them. From my perspective, we are right now, what happened? Oh, it's working. People who are joining the corporations, various corporations right now, do we realize that these people are going to retire around 2050, maybe 2055? That's when these people are going to retire. And we don't know what 2020 is going to look like. So what I'm presenting to you is the fact that future is anything but a linear continuity of the present. Anything but that. If I presented to you the Pakistan of the 1960s, the Ayub Khan's Pakistan, which lived in the image of Quaid-e-Azam, the distant, cold, proper Pakistan, which was development-focused, growth-focused, you wouldn't be able to predict the 1970s. The age of disruption, roti, kapda, makan, pakad lo, sarmayadar, gali, ye, wo. There was no possibility to look at the Pakistan of the 1960s and have a linear projection into the 1970s. In 4 to 5, 7 years of People's Party, everything changed. The modes of production changed through nationalization. The modes of distribution changed through depots. Your clothes changed. Who had seen their grand uncle or uncle wear an orange-colored shalwar kameez? Was there any possibility of that? There were 3 shades, gray, white, and if you were really flamboyant, that boski color. The language changed. The national anthem changed from Pak Sar Zameen to Jeeve Jeeve Pakistan Soni Dharti. Everything changed. And it was in less than 5 to 7 years that all of this changed. And if I gave you the Pakistan of the 1970s, my friends, you wouldn't be able to predict the 1980s. Chadar, Char Diwari, Tahaffuz, Islam, Jihad. So much for linearity. There was no possibility of predicting these futures, no possibility. These are disparate futures which have nothing to do with each other. Now, if I presented the 1990s and the 2000s to you, would you be silly enough to try to predict the 1920s? Set aside 2050, when most of your youth, most of your workforce which is joining right now is going to retire. Let me present to you that there is no possibility for you to predict what the future entails. And therefore, rather than getting into the game of predicting uncertainties, as a leader, you have to begin to embrace the art of embracing uncertainties. Rather than being in a strategy, you have to be in the business of creating strategists. So all of the youth, the workforce that you're talking about, the leaders that you're alluding to, are going to be the strategists of the future. And you, my friends, your corporations, are the manufacturing sites of these strategists. And that's how you have to look at yourself, your habitat, your corporation, and your people, the future leaders. If I begin to show you some of the trends that are going to shape up the future world, because you may not be able to see what the world may look like, but you can begin to see some of the formations, some of the contours. What do you see? You see globalization, which means what? Which basically means virtualization. A gadget is going to be innovated at Oxford, is going to be designed around Stanford, is going to be manufactured in Taiwan, is going to shipped to Europe, and going to be consumed in Pakistan. How do you define this product? How do you define Mango? How do you define Zara? How do you define this virtualization that is forthcoming? How do you define the borderlessness that I've just alluded to? So you are not at HBL Pakistan anymore. You'd be foolish to think that there is a country in which there is a corporation, in which there is a CEO who's hiring the talent. You'd be amiss if you thought of the future in that way. If you thought of the energy, it's going to be all renewable, it's going to be all green, it's going to be all distributed. So all of these big coal plants that we're building and all of these distribution networks and the conversation about transmission lines is passé. It's all history. And technology is nothing but convergence and miniaturization. The retina that you're going to drop behind your eye, the retina, what is it going to be? Material science? Biology, chemistry, or engineering? Because it's the biology which is going to constitute the new surface. How do you define that? How do you even begin to imagine this convergence of technology? And information is going to, you've heard a lot about disenfranchisement. Now is the age of enfranchisement. People are going to be enfranchised, and there's going to be democratization of knowledge. So all of the hierarchies that you're used to, the boundaries of those hierarchies are now becoming porous and dismantling in front of you. So whatever you do, your world is going to disrupt. Your world is going to change. It's going to be communities, not countries. Just remember that. It's going to be boundlessness, not boundaries. Just remember that. It's going to be machine, not man. Just remember that, because it may sound like rocket science, but you may all be displaced. So much of the skills that you're equipped for to do the human things, some of those human things would be displaced by the machines. So what are you going to do then? And you think that is too far into the future? Did you not hear about the rate of change? About how the drives are changing? About how you used to have Skype? Who uses Skype now? I use WhatsApp. My son laughs at me. I don't know what Snapchat, what he uses, that hybrid of kind of cartoons and the pictures and the messages that they use in real time. They don't type, they talk. He has a watch. He talks into the watch. All of this is changing. So machine, perhaps, not man. Are you prepared for that? Sustainability, not satiation. Are you prepared for that? So the world is changing, with or without you. And that's the leadership role that you need to assume. I can give you many examples. I can walk you through this little cartoon that I've put together for you. I can talk about the energy I already have. But do you realize what Tesla is doing to the world? And Tesla is past. What is happening in the labs is not Tesla. Tesla has happened. Tesla happened 10 years ago. Just understand that. Do you even understand what is going to happen as you move forward in the next decade when the idea, not your illness, the idea of life and death is going to be renegotiated with stem cell therapies? We're already, as we speak, as I speak, for the past 20 years, we've been expressing human monoclonal antibodies in the ovary lines of rats. As we proceed, we'd be expressing these human proteins in corn. And in 10 to 15 years, we'd be taking a cell out of your body, re-engineering it, redirecting it, and re-expressing it, and there'd be a new you, a different you, an engineered you. Are you prepared for that? Nothing that I'm talking about is rocket science. Everything that I'm talking about has happened, is happening as we speak. And I've not spoken about smart homes. I've not spoken about the convergence, this retail and banking, financial solutions and services and lifestyle, it's one. What are you going to call that device that your children are going to hold? That Google goggle? What is that device going to be? Is it a computer? Is it a phone? Is it a pair of glasses? When you walk into the retail and you pick up basically a bottle, and you walk out and a counselor walks by as you swipe your card, you don't swipe your card. Cards are passé. You don't swipe your cards. As you pull it off the shelf, it gets recorded and it's basically deducted from your account, and if you choose not to have it and you put it back, your account is adjusted. This is already happening. This is already happening. This, my friends, is the age of disruption. Not Toyota Corolla getting manufactured in Pakistan. That's not the future that you're preparing for. It's not about generic medications. It's about large molecules and cellular therapies. That's the future that many of you, most of you are going to encounter now as we speak. The question that I pose to you in the way of leadership is, are you prepared? Because this train, my friends, is leaving with you or without you. Because the train is leaving. So what is basically the future leader? The future leader is Captain Kirk from Star Trek. He is the future leader. The one who has the foresight, the one who would dare to go where no man has ever gone. The ultimate frontier, not just the space. Everything that you remember from Star Trek, and many of you would not because you weren't even born when Zubair and I used to see that no, Zubair is much younger, sorry, pardon me. I mean, he looked at me so weird. He said, "Oh my God, what are you doing to me in public?" But that black and white television that had Mr. Spock, if you remember, you know what Mr. Spock was? Mr. Spock was a hybrid. Mr. Spock was Dolly the sheep, 20 years before Dolly the sheep. Mr. Spock was basically that monoclonal antibody, that jump species. And human beings are expressed in other species. That is what Mr. Spock was. Do you remember that transponder that said, "Beam me, Scotty"? That was the cell phone. It was the precursor of the cell phone. And before the second, what do you call the second, it's called series, session, what is that? Oh, the television programs, they have these seasons. Before the second season or the third season of Star Trek was over, Mir Shakilur Rahman already had a cell phone this big, which could be used as a brick. And he would make sure that he was parked by Liberty Market, Lahore, and every passing girl saw that he had a cell phone. In a metallic blue Mercedes. And believe me, I was very impressed. But all this happened while we were watching Star Trek. Everything, the little button that you pressed and got your coffee turned out to be microwave. And these things were not there. There was no cell phone at that point in time. There were no microwaves at that point in time. There was no Dolly the sheep. There was no biogenomic revolution. So you want to be the leader? You will have to develop that foresight. That foresight that looks into the position, looks into the future, and takes a position in the history of future. That is basically the leadership required. Someone who has the guts and the galls to take a position in the history of future. What else do you need? You need an insight. Insight of all the things that are in front of you. And as, what is that Ghalib's little misra which says, "Nigah ki humne paida rishta-e rabte alaik se." The pattern of relationship between the objects, you need to have an insight to see that. Nothing that Apple did was real. Technology, I mean. Nothing that Apple did was real technology. It was all off-the-shelf technology. They just had the insight of figuring out what was in the air, smelling that little thing in the air, and then putting things together, having the insight of putting the solutions together. I mean, these young punks from a college realize how important it is for other young beings and now much older beings to be seen, and created the largest corporation of the world, Facebook. No new technology, just an insight. So you need to have a foresight, and you need to have an insight. And then you need to have the power of imagination. The power of human imagination. If you have these three components, you have the future leader in front of you somewhere in this room. So all of those traditional things of monitoring and this and that and strong and bureaucracy and structures and processes, yes, they're all important and they'll continue to be important. But they're not going to be the defining features of the future. Future shall be defined by a foresight, by an insight, and an ocean of human imagination. And my friends, what do we have other than human imagination? We're all products of that imagination. You first imagine and then come into being. What are going to be some of the competencies that are going to be required? And the first and the foremost here that I present to you is creativity, which comes from imagination. It's like Disney, it's that magic. It's like dream. It's that dream. That dream that you have to dream if you want to be the future leaders. And this creativity is diverse, it is distinct, and it's dynamic. It's as diverse as you go and tell me who is a bigger leader, Spielberg or Einstein? Is it the dancer? Is it the creator of the movies? It is the creator of science, objects, machines. It's diverse. So do not be foolish enough to define or try to define human creativity in a particular genre, whether it be science or corporation or gadget. Human imagination, human creativity, human ingenuity is diverse. It's also dynamic. I gave you the example of that retina. It is going to be multidisciplinary. It is where engineering and biology and science and music and theater is all going to come together. So when you're looking for hunting for talent, hunt for this diversity. Hunt for this dynamism. One thing I would say, that all of creativity put together, if you don't have the heart, if you don't have the courage to be wrong, you'd never be able to create anything that is of any value to anyone ever. So when you're looking for the talent, you're looking for people who have the heart to be wrong, bold enough to imagine, and the heart large enough to be wrong. And it's perfectly all right to be wrong. And what is it that in your corporations is enormously punitive? It is to be wrong. What do you do when you do these evaluations, these standardized evaluations of the talent that you've hired? Who is wrong, who is right? Those who are right, push them forward. Those who are wrong, reprimand them once, twice, exit them. But the true tales are sometimes in the tales of the distribution. So when you basically are hunting talent, looking for talent, look for people who are bold enough to imagine and have the heart large enough to be wrong, and it's perfectly all right to be wrong. I mean, I'm reminded of this one TED talk in which I saw this guy who was saying that there was this class in which this little girl was drawing something, and she was never attentive, and the teacher kind of walked up to her and said, "What are you drawing?" And she said, "I'm drawing a picture of God." And the teacher said, "But no one has seen God." She said, "They will in a minute." And that is basically the kind of imagination that is going to be required of the future leaders that are forthcoming. And if it is going to be as diverse, as dynamic, and as distinct as I'm proposing, then you will have to collaborate, because all of these skills are not going to be with one person. So this boundarylessness, all of these things that I mentioned, the design, the outsourcing revolution, that you focus on your core competencies as a person, you focus on your core competencies as an organization, and what is redundant or base, you outsource. What you cannot house within you, because even the largest corporations of the world cannot house everything, you make sure that all of those important elements are connected. You have to, as a leader, a responsibility to connect all the dots. So collaboration. And finally, when you're doing all of this, and I'm proposing that you basically swing the bat for a 6 and maybe get caught at the boundary, and it's perfectly all right for young men and women to do that. Just remember that when you're doing that amongst people my age, who are not as young as you and who are not as brave as you, we would resist. We will bring you down. We have taken it upon ourselves to bring you down, because our success came from an environment which is no more. We don't fear the change that you guys want to affect. We fear to be changed. We don't fear change. People my age, we fear to be changed. So we try to control. And the only way out, because we are more powerful than you, is to communicate. Tell us that there is nothing that we need to fear. Tell us that all of these elements, the new science, the new business models, the new tacit systems, they are at as much at our thumb tips as they are to yours. If you don't communicate effectively, if we don't communicate effectively, we would not be able to build the future that I'm talking about. And finally, it's all about commitment. I mean, we as humans only in literature celebrate tragedy. What else do we celebrate? We celebrate Imam Hussein, not Yazid. We celebrate this commitment, this entrepreneurial commitment, or this religious commitment, or whichever commitment you want to talk about. We celebrate people who stand up, get counted, and take a fall every now and then. So don't worry about taking a fall. Stand up, get counted. You guys have ways to go. A couple of falls would only bruise your kneecaps. So commit yourself like an entrepreneur. Let not failure stand in your way. Every time you fail, it makes you lighter. You can shed off the burden of success and you can fly again without carrying any burden. New imagination, new ideas, new teams. Form them, fly with them. You can only lead what you're meant to lead. So have faith. Listen to your heart and find that faith. Believe in it and commit yourself. I mean, if this was the last day of your life, would you be doing what you're doing today? And if the answer is no, you're in the wrong business, my friends. Thank you very much for your attention.
Tour de force, Musadik bhai. I think we need to have a conference on just this topic of disruption and what it means for everyone. But I think it's में बहुत interesting insight है और मेरा जो एक insight इनसे जो मिला है वो ये है courage, creativity, collaboration and commitment. You don't need a lot of money to demonstrate it. You don't need a lot of infrastructure. It is all within all of us to be able to exercise it and to become the leaders. So it's a great time for all of us because those of us who exercise these things can really catapult ourselves forward.